Ready for your next chapter of the Infinity Ring, Book 4, Curse of the Ancients? I am. We're starting chapter 13. This is who we are. The warping that seemed so hard on everyone else was practically therapeutic for Dak. He couldn't believe how much better he felt as he and Sarah continued to wander the village in search of Rick. Only a few days ago plus a millennium, a wall had fallen on his head. How many people had taken an actual stone wall fall on their head? The number had to be fairly low, and Dak was just walking around like it was nothing. He had to admit it. It was a little superhero-esque. "I'm back, baby," he muttered under his breath. And being back meant fixing the brakes, saving the world, all of it hopefully leading to a heartfelt reunion with his parents that would be shown live on some kind of morning news show. And no, he wouldn't be rocking the breechcloth on national TV. "I don't see Rick anywhere," Sarah said as they moved down a less crowded village path, about 100 yards from the observatory. Dak stopped walking and surveyed the scene. The huts were more modern now and slightly larger. They were packed in more tightly. He turned to Sarah. "Dude, we have to start thinking like the guy. Where would you go if you were in love with the charming snake charmer who's been deceased for approximately a millennium?" Sarah shot him a disapproving look. "What?" Dak said. "I'm trying to put myself in the mind of the missing." "Not funny." Sarah started walking again. "You have to admit," Dak said, following her, "it was pretty wild what she did with all those snakes." Sarah picked up a rock, tossed it down the path in front of them. "All I know is that we were lucky to get out of there alive." "I'll give you that, Derek." Dak watched along another small group of Mayans hurry past with bags slung over their shoulders, all of them glancing back down the road behind them, like they were doing something they weren't supposed to be. It suddenly occurred to Dak how much these people's lives must have changed since the arrival of the Spanish. One thing was for sure, Dak no longer viewed the Mayan as untrustworthy. History hadn't given them nearly enough credit, which made him wonder what else history had gotten wrong. "What do you think that sculpture symbolizes?" Sarah asked, motioning toward one in the front of the stone wall that surrounded the small cluster of huts. It looked like a face partially covered by a net or scales. "I've seen it in a few places now." "I've seen it too," Dak said. "My guess that as it reads, 'In honor of Dak Smith, our eternal hero.'" "Yeah," Sarah said. "But because you know how I saved that little girl or whatever, you saw all the flowers and food they left me, right?" Sarah rolled her eyes. Another group of Mayans passed by, slightly larger than the one before. "Excuse me," Sarah said to the last young woman. She pointed to the sculpture. "What does that mean?" "Do you know what it means?" "Oh, of course," the woman said, backpedaling as she spoke to Sarah. "It's the secret symbol of friendship." "Secret symbol of friendship?" Dak said. "That's weird. If it's so secret, why is it in so many different places?" The woman looked Dak up and down. It was clear she hadn't noticed him until he'd spoken to Sarah. "I'm sorry, but we're actually in a hurry," the woman said. She turned back around and jogged a few steps to catch up with her friends. Dak looked at Sarah. Clearly, she was intimidated by my imposing physique. "Yeah, that's probably what it was," Sarah said. "Why don't you let me do the talking from now on?" Dak shrugged. He had to admit that Sarah did a better job of blending in here. "Suit yourself. Anyway, it sure seems like a lot of people are heading up to the cave. Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "What?" "That we should follow them, check what's going on." Sarah put her hands on her hips to look away from Dak for a few seconds. He followed her eyes down the alley where two Franciscan monks were walking side by side in fluffy-looking robes. "We can't just leave Rick," Sarah said. "We're not leaving him," Dak told her. "We're just momentarily suspending our search. Besides, isn't this mission bigger than any one person? That's what Rick always says. Just because he's off somewhere pining over Medusa doesn't mean the rest of us are supposed to stop working. Sarah was staring at Dak with a sad expression on her face, like she felt sorry for him. He'd caught her staring at him this way a number of times since they landed here. He didn't understand. Why would anyone feel sorry for him? Was it because of his parents? Sure, it was rotten luck they'd been lost in a river of time, but they'd be reunited. And in the meantime, he was busy living history, fixing it where it needed to be fixed. Look, Dak said, breaking eye contact, I promise we'll come back, okay? Unless you want to stick around for a conversation with those guys. He motioned toward the monks. Excuse me. Fine, Sarah said. Excuse me. Fine, Sarah said. We'll go check it out when we're coming back down here and finding Rick. Dak pumped his fist a few times and waved for Sarah to follow him. He didn't know what to expect from the secret Mayan meeting, but he was bound to be worth seeing. Dak and Sarah climbed the boulders in front of the cave and took a few steps inside. The musty smell brought back a slew of memories for Dak. He remembered waking up in the makeshift cot with the man wearing feathers, burning herbs over his chest. He remembered watching Sarah's lips move as she spoke to him in words he couldn't quite hear. But mostly he remembered the strange visions he had throughout his recovery. There was one where he was trapped inside a well, or the one where he was climbing through a cramped tunnel that never seemed to end. But the strangest vision of all was the one where Sarah had come to him and revealed that Ithic was her father. Dak peeked at Sarah now as she studied the several dozen Mayans gathered inside the cave. If Sarah traced her family tree back far enough, she wondered if it would lead her all the way back to this very village. All right, my good people, a young Mayan man suddenly announced. Bring it in a little tighter, please. They moved deeper inside the cave, and some of them holding candles or masks or food offerings. Sarah led Dak behind a large limestone sculpture where they were hidden. We can listen for a few minutes, she whispered, but then we're going back to find Rick. Fine, Dak whispered back. As you all know, the man continued, there are rumors that Diego de Landa will physically punish anyone caught paying respects to our spiritual ancestors. We have begun to meet in these caves because the monks believe they are haunted. That provides us with some measure of safety. Any newcomers? Tonight you will join us in honoring Amun Chanka Chak, something Ajal, and many others in our traditional ways, because this is who we are, yes? Dak watched everyone nod and echo. This is who we are. He'd never seen anything like it. Good, the man said. Now pull out whatever you have brought and let us begin. Everyone who had a bag reached in now and pulled out some type of artifact. Dak saw some produce codices, masks, figurines, elaborate costumes, headdresses, incense candles, and detailed tapestries. They might be able to change the way we believe out there, the man said, pointing outside the cave. But they cannot change the way we believe in here. He thumbed against his chest several times to repeat, never in here. Without any further direction, the Mayans all began chanting together and dancing. A few had held masks up to their face and bowed to the people around them. Dak turned to Sarah and whispered, You heard what he said is going on, right? Diego de Landa is a Franciscan monk known for traveling to the most remote Mayan villages to try to convert all the indigenous people to Christianity. According to the most historical accounts, he was the single most influential figure in the suppression of Mayan... Be quiet, Dak, Sarah interrupted. Just watch and listen. Maybe you'll learn something. Dak grinned. Look who's starting to admire the Mayans, he whispered. They both spun around quickly when they heard voices coming from the opening of the cave. Dak saw 5 large men, dressed more differently than the Mayans, peering in at the processions. They didn't seem to notice Dak and Sarah hiding behind the sculpture. One of the men pointed at the Mayans and nodded, and they all moved into the cave together. Dak pushed down Sarah's head and ducked himself so the men wouldn't see them as they passed by. One of the Spaniards shouted at the Mayans, "Every one of you must come with us. There's no use trying to get away." Each of the 5 men produced either crossbows or muskets. The chanting and dancing immediately stopped. Many of the Mayans held up their hands to surrender peacefully, but others sprinted toward the cave exit, pushing past the Spaniards on their way by knocking 2 of the men over. The 3 men who remained standing opened fire on the fleeing Mayans. One young Mayan man fell on his stomach when the arrow pierced his back. He hopped back up and staggered a few more steps and then collapsed back onto the ground. The surrendered Mayans all gasped as the injured man went still. Sarah made a move for the dying man, but Dak grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "They can't know we're here," he shouted. Sarah turned her glassy eyes toward Dak, but said nothing. "Let's make this easy, folks," one of the Spaniards announced. "We don't want any more casualties." The Mayans were all led out of the cave in connected shackles, heads bowed. The injustice of it all bubbled inside Dak's chest. All they had been doing was celebrating their history. Dak could relate. History was everything to him. What if someone shot at him for studying the Second Roman Empire? He watched one of the Spaniards shove the last Mayan toward the exit of the cave, and then they were gone. They had just left the dead Mayan man to rot. "They killed him," Sarah cried, stepping out from behind the limestone sculpture, "and we did nothing." "What could we have done?" said Dak. Sarah knelt down beside the fallen man and closed his eyelids. "And for what?" she said, choking up as she spoke. "What did he die for?" Dak knelt beside her. "It isn't fair," he said. "Maybe this is why we're here, Sarah, to make sure the Mayan are no longer treated this way. Or maybe we're here to change the way they're perceived by future generations." Sarah didn't say anything. She just kept staring down at the man, shaking her head. Dak moved deeper into the cave. He picked one of the colorful masks and studied the details, and then he knelt down and flopped through several codices lying in the clay dirt. One of them had a painting of a ceiba tree. He moved over to the large wooden box filled with smaller masks and figurines and traditional-looking jewelry. He picked up a paintbrush and then a carefully painted ceramic, an old locket similar to the one Kaisa had tried to give Rick. Then he found several small ceramic instruments that resembled modern drums and flutes. "Leave me alone!" Sarah suddenly shouted. Dak spun around to find a large Spanish man restraining Sarah's hands behind her back. The man looked up at Dak and said, "Let's go, boy. Don't make it any harder than it has to be." Sarah tried to wrestle away from the man, but he whacked her at the back of the head with an elbow and tightened his restraints. "Don't touch her!" Dak shouted. "Then get over here," the man shouted back. Dak reached back into the box and dug around for the locket. He pulled it out and hid it in his breechcloth as he stood up. The Spaniard was already shoving Sarah toward Dak and readying a second restraint. And that's chapter 13. Next is chapter 14, Wisdom in a Prison Cell. So apparently they're going to prison. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Continue to try to go outside, enjoy yourself, and keep watching for my videos. Bye.